and welcome to SafeR Journeys, a podcast dedicated to raising children, ending violence, and ending oppression. I am one of your hosts, Heather. I am the Community Engagement Specialist. I work in prevention of violence here at Safe Journeys in North Central Illinois. And I'm here with my co-host,
Melissa, and I am the Community Engagement Director. And I just love being in this violence prevention department. I think I've said that before, but it's just like one of my favorite things in the whole world. So when I hear you introduce yourself and talk about prevention, I just get like super excited.
Oh, I love that. I really like just saying violence prevention.
So do I.
Period. Like instead of, for so long, we're like intimate partner, domestic violence, sexual violence, but like truly all the factors are so intertwined that like you can just say violence prevention.
And a lot of times it gets chalked up to just like prevention education. And for some reason, like so much that more has really gotten me like just maybe even irritated at this point, because I think it's so much more than that, because our strategies aren't just like educating. Yeah. There's so many more components to it.
We're creating resilience, right?
Yeah.
We're creating a community bolstering protective factors, right?
Yep.
And truly, part of that work is why we have a special guest today.
Yes, that's right. And so there are different ways to do violence prevention, and there's primary prevention strategies, there's secondary, which are more like crisis intervention kind of strategies, and then there's tertiary prevention, where we're looking at, we need to make this long-term change for the people who it's impacted most. And so these are people who may have abused their partner in the past. This could also look like providing counseling services for people who have experienced abuse too. So
or witnessed.
So I just love what we're going to be talking about today. I do want to give a quick trigger warning before we get into it, that we are going to be discussing topics of domestic and sexual violence, primarily intimate partner violence in this episode.
Yep. All right. So today we are going to be talking about people who have used abuse in intimate partner relationships in the past. And you may recall 2 episodes or so ago, we talked about how we've recently had a change of heart and we no longer feel it's acceptable to kick people out of the movement, right? It's too important. And if someone has abused an individual or used abusive behaviors in the past, we have to recognize there is an opportunity for change. And if we aren't addressing that, then we're not really stopping abuse from happening.
That's right. We had talked about how in the world are we supposed to prevent violence if we're not working with the people who have used violence?
Right. Yes, exactly. And so that is why we have a very special guest.
Yes. And this person is the one we were talking about episodes ago when we talked about this, because she is the one who helped change our minds. She's made such a big impact on our violence prevention team here, and I think on our agency as a whole. You know, like for so long, Safe Journeys provided services for survivors.
And only survivors.
I would say too, like the violence prevention services, of course, like
that's everybody.
All the outward looking stuff. We were working with the communities, working with particular groups. But this program came to us last year, and I forget exactly what month it was, but that doesn't matter, because like it brought us Mara. And so we have Mara here today. She's the director of our Partner Abuse Intervention Program, otherwise known as PAIP, here at Safe Journeys. And so, Mara, welcome to the SafeR Journeys podcast.
My goodness, thank you. That was such an enthusiastic welcome, too.
Like seriously, I don't think you understand the impact you've had on the violence prevention team.
Oh.
Really? In like a positive way.
Yes.
Because before you showed up, we had nothing nice to say.
I think many people do.
You know,
right? That's not uncommon.
I was skeptical when I'm like, is this program going to work? I haven't seen any evidence that it really works. Like I was a big turd about it, to be honest.
She was providing like studies on how it's not.
I was like, we're wasting our time. But I think what you have to say is so powerful, and it is.
Yes.
And I believe it to be true. And you have 100% changed my mind.
I am so glad that I have had the opportunity to meet you
Yeah.
and talk to you.
No,
about
you really
that,
have.
and that opinion is shifted.
So, will you tell us a little bit about the PAIP program?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Illinois, we call it PAIP. It can also be called Batterers Intervention Program, or even just what would be the best way to say, like intervention with partners who've used intimate partner violence. It goes by a lot of different names,
Sure.
no matter where you find it. But our program is a 26-week program. Participants attend one group a week in the evenings. And most of them are referred from the court system or the child welfare systems, but we do have some voluntary enrollment. Prior to coming to the group, they come and they sit down with a facilitator for their assessment, which generally takes like an hour, hour and a half. And during that time, we talk about why are you here? We're going through police reports or maybe reports from DCFS or the Youth Service Bureau, which is, an agency near us.
We know we had Stephanie on.
Okay,
Woo!
all right. Awesome. She's wonderful.
Yes.
And so during that time, we talk about it. We make sure that PAIP is the correct fit because as we know, the system, people can slip through. And perhaps we have a survivor who, used reactive violence or secondary aggression and PAIP isn't the right fit for them. So that's why we do that assessment. And after that, we do an orientation where we're talking about what does this look like? What is expected of you? I say over and over, you can't hold someone to an expectation they don't know exists.
True.
That's a really big one, actually.
Yes.
And we've gotten some feedback from participants that that's something that they take with them.
I
So
like that.
after they're enrolled, we'll go over any other case management needs that they may have. So lots of times we're looking at support for rent, a lot of mental health support, substance use and abuse treatment. I can't expect you to be vulnerable and come and talk in a group and then go home with no healthy coping mechanisms and instead leaning on a coping mechanism that isn't healthy for you or the people around you. After that, groups themselves are co-facilitated and they're discussion-based. So kind of like the conversation we're having now, we'll have that conversation in a group setting with two facilitators and then our group of participants. So we talk about behaviors that are used, abuse behaviors that are used as we strive for accountability, and we break down the belief systems that support the use of harmful behaviors.
That sounds like intense work.
Oh, yeah, we hear about a lot of violence, which is part of the work. And honestly, when I hear people openly saying, I have done this, I am so proud, right? And it hurts for us as facilitators because of that vicarious trauma. And we work to build those resiliency factors. But to hear that those behaviors named and that accountability taken is really powerful. And it's a really big step because no one wants to come in and say, I physically abused my partner when I pushed them down the stairs. That's not easy to say at all. And it takes time and effort and a shift in the way that we think about ourselves.
Yeah, it sounds like a therapy group.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I'm like, whenever I have an issue I'm trying to work on, right, in my therapy or myself, the first step is being aware that it's an issue and stating that it's an issue. So that's what you're saying here.
Yeah, absolutely. We use a lot of that CBT, that cognitive behavioral therapy that you would also see used by therapists.
So I have lots and lots of questions.
I'm happy to answer them.
Are there a lot of these programs around? Is this really, really popular? What's the uptake? Do you know what other states are doing?
Yeah. So as of 2017, which is the most recent research I can find on the laws surrounding PAIP or BIP programs, only 4 U.S. states do not have laws that outline how these programs should be conducted. There are currently 93 DHS compliant PAIP programs operating in Illinois. And when I say DHS compliant, because it's a state funded program, we have to make sure that we're meeting the metrics that they ask for and using the strategies that they outline. But PAIP is also worldwide. So in networking groups, we'll talk to people from Australia, from Canada. Most recently, I heard a presentation by a facilitator from Greece. So they are really prevalent. Yes.
Good.
I love the like international collaboration. Well, I'm saying that when we've had Janine from Australia on before. So like clearly we do, because they have a lot of times we get siloed like in each country, and like we don't get to learn from other folks.
Yeah.
So I think that's really awesome. Are those programs are they all pretty similar?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So in terms of the ultimate goal being the same, yes, we want people to stop using abuse and change those belief systems. In the approach and the outline to that goal, it varies widely. So in an example, I can think of the woman who was speaking as a facilitator from Greece. Their legal system has much more clear outline and definition about what is and isn't legal. So in Greece, if you are someone who is accused of using abuse behaviors, it is on you to prove that you didn't do that, rather than in America, where our system operates as an innocent until proven guilty.
Interesting. Wow, that's got to affect a lot of things in their provision of services for victims of abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And you were talking about like the outline and things. What kinds of things do you cover?
I think a better question would be, what don't we cover?
Ooh, yeah.
Relationships are complicated, and those strategies that we use in our relationships stretch to almost every aspect of our life, like negotiation, and trust and support, shared responsibility, economic partnership, responsible parenting, the very baseline communication skills that we need to have a healthy discussion or a healthy argument with someone, because arguments can be healthy. I always say that if you think your kids shouldn't see your argument, then you aren't arguing right.
I like that a lot.
So,
wow. Hard. And now I'm just processing and I'm like, need a second here, because I think that's super valuable. Could we talk a little bit more about the children? Are some of your clients' parents?
Yeah, over 85% of the participants currently active in PAIP are parents. Yes.
Wow, I can only imagine participating in this program and being a parent would be beneficial to your child and your parenting skills. And of course your partner, right?
Yeah. And to you too. So I would say the vast majority of them are actually wonderful parents, with the exception of exposing their children to abuse. They truly do want to create a better life for their children, as every parent does. And sometimes they don't recognize that seeing mom and dad fight, or dad and dad and mom, whomever your parents are, seeing them fight can have that long-lasting impact. So we'll talk about ACE scores. We'll talk about the trauma that's created by seeing the people who are supposed to love us and keep us safe make us feel unsafe. And that can be a really big light bulb moment for participants, because they don't even realize, because many of them grew up in homes where they either witnessed or experienced abuse themselves.
Yeah, that was going to be my next comment, was when I have looked at working with individuals who may have used abusive behaviors, one of the common themes in what I was reading was that a lot of them themselves have experienced trauma of some sort in their past.
Yeah, absolutely. So an example that I use often is, so John Doe grows up and he is running through the house, breaking things, and his dad had told him no. And then he does it again, and his dad gets out the belt and beats him, or whoops him, right? Might be a more common term. And that is what John learned as a form of expressing something that an authority figure didn't want done. So now John grows up, and John gets in a relationship with Jane. And Jane perhaps does something that John doesn't like. Right. And now John leans on the only skills he has been taught, which is to use that violence against the person he cares about. And if we don't intervene and give people different tools and break that generational cycle of abuse, then it's just going to keep going.
Yeah. Can you say more about the cycle of abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. So are you asking generational or just intrapersonal?
Can you talk about interpersonal and then tie it into generational for us?
Yeah. So when we talk about the cycle of abuse, we look at 3 stages. The honeymoon stage, this is love bombing, flowers, I love yous, you're the best person in my life, can't live without you. After that is very often followed this tension building stage. And that is when our survivors or our victims are going to start feeling like they need to walk on eggshells, like they're afraid to upset their partner. And after that comes the outburst, and that is the use of violence. And I would like to make it just a disclaimer that all abusive relationships do not always experience the cycle of violence. So if you're concerned that your relationship is abusive, and I just said that and you're like, oh, that doesn't really happen in my life, that doesn't mean that it's not an abusive relationship or a healthy relationship. So with that cycle of violence, that tension, outburst, etc., our participants, the people who use abuse, generally don't even notice that that's happening. They're going to feel fine, explode, fine. And I think that might also be what they saw in their homes, especially when we're kids. We're out at school and then we move into work, and so we're not at home. So maybe in the morning everything is fine with the parent, and then you come home and that parent is now upset, agitated, angry, and may take that out on their children. Mm-hmm. And so for that reason, they'll learn automatically, oh, I'm walking on eggshells around this person. And then most kids are going to push back. Like, how many times have you been told, don't talk back to me by a parent or something like that? Even if it was expressing an emotion, and then that was really shut down. So then the parents are shutting down the ability of a child to healthily express and regulate emotions, and that child's letting them build up and then creating that cycle within themselves.
Yeah, we just talked in that with Ashley. We were talking about the feedback, like how beneficial it is when we hear feedback from our kids, and how a lot of times our initial reaction, she brought up the ego, right? And our initial reaction is often not awesome, unless you've done a significant amount of work to respond differently.
Right.
And that we can't, like, what's the word? I think I said deprogramming the kids because we keep saying, like, no, you're wrong. We shut that emotion down. It invalidates their feelings and sort of bolsters the potential that they're going to use unhealthy behaviors in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, like, that was so incredibly insightful too. And thank you for saying and validating, like, that even if it doesn't follow the cycle of abuse, that, like, what you're experiencing, like, it could still be abusive, you know, like, just because it doesn't follow this, like, template here, it's like, your experience is valid.
Yeah, people deserve to feel safe in their relationships and with the person that they choose to share their heart and body and mind with. If you experience that vulnerability and someone uses it against you, you're probably not going to share that again, which makes it impossible for a healthy relationship. And again, feeds into that cycle of a lack of communication, buildup of frustration, and then explosion.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's just, we're sitting here like, okay, taking it all in for a second.
It's so true.
So you said court often is how they get to you. Are there folks who just say, hey, I see these things in myself. I see that there's a program that might be able to help me?
We have not had that with our program yet. I don't think it's impossible, but we have had persons whose partners may be receiving services at Safe Journeys and who then feel safe enough to talk to the offending partner and encourage them to engage with our services. And
I did not realize that. That is amazing. Wow.
Yeah, and it's not always safe for someone to make that suggestion, but sometimes it is.
I'm just thinking, like, how great that is that Safe Journeys is, like, able to heal the whole family. Or not. We don't just show up and heal people. I wish. We just touch people. You're healed. Woo! Yeah, right. But we facilitate healing for them. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. I wasn't aware that like, beautiful interdepartmental, like, collaboration was happening. That's wonderful.
Yeah. We get actually, when we enroll people in PAIP, we get a release of information because we respect confidentiality to contact their partner and offer counseling services to their partners. So their partners now have the option to engage with Safe Journeys survivor services if they so choose.
Wow.
I also didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're really, like, making sure that, like, holistically anybody that's coming to your program, the people around them, their children, their other partners potentially are safe and getting the support that they need as well.
Yeah, emotionally intelligent and trauma-informed services are really important to me.
Yeah.
As they are to our agency.
Well, of course. Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, definitely.
And I love that, like, with your like tentacle approach, you are making sure people have like these skills for healthy relationships, no matter who they are.
Yeah, super important.
That's really neat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are these services paid for by a nonprofit or government? Like, how is it free? Can you tell us a little bit more about like that funding part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So very often when people are referred through the child welfare system, they get a service plan from their caseworker. If a service that is paid for is mandated in that service plan, very often the child welfare agency will contract on behalf of the participant and pay those fees. Otherwise, if they're court-ordered or voluntary, those fees are a part of the accountability that we ask for. I'm not asking for $1 million, right? It's a salary-based scale, so a sliding scale. And we also take into account like bills. So we'll go through and sit down and do budgeting with our participants. But just as a court fee would be on the person who is convicted to pay, so too are the fees of PAIP.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And yeah, I think you're not asking for it. Using a sliding scale, I think makes a big difference because you're taking a percentage or a portion you're looking at rather than like, we're going to bankrupt you.
Yeah, absolutely. I researched the median incomes of the counties and communities that we serve and based it on that.
That's great. That's awesome. You're so thoughtful. Like it is so clear in administering this program, how thoughtful you are in looking at, again, holistically, the individual's life.
Yeah, I've never found a one-size-fits-all approach actually fits all. So,
which is unfortunate. It would make everyone's lives much easier. But yes.
Have you found it like challenging at all to get the word out about this program? Like, what has it felt like to try and even have this conversation with people and say, like, you know, Safe Journeys also offers this thing over here, like for people who have abused their partner. But what's that been like for you?
It definitely can be challenging because it feels sometimes that I walk a fine line. I don't want to take away from the validity of survivors and the services that they deserve and have the option to engage with. Well, at the same time, the validity of the need of the people who have caused abuse is just as important. If you just keep doing these things over and over, you go to court over and over, nothing is going to change. Sitting in a cell is not going to teach you healthy communication. It's not going to teach you nonviolent ways to resolve conflict.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important to talk about, that our overall goal is making a safer world for our children by ending the cycle of abuse with the people who use it.
And honestly, that matches, like, I know the vision that our executive director and the board holds too, like that creating a safer community.
Yeah. Yeah, we all want that. But I mean, we live in a rural area, so getting word out is very difficult. We do a lot of one-on-one connection with the referral systems themselves. So working with probation, parole, judges, state's attorneys, and our executive director has been crucial in helping to utilize those connections and help get the word out in a one-on-one type situation.
That's good. That's good. And I know I believe you have a presentation coming up with one of our local libraries.
I do.
Soon.
I'm so excited. Thank you, Melissa.
Well, no problem. But I'm just so excited that you're going to get to start talking about this with the public in more of the public eye, because we're also going to go on another podcast and talk about it too together.
So exciting.
Well,
yes, I'll be there with you.
I'm excited as well. Like, I think it's just so important that we continue to talk about this, because before we didn't even have the language to talk about it. Like we've said, like, you really did come in and provide education for us and change our minds. Like, we honestly, like, we just were not about it at all.
That's fair. That's valid.
And like, you showing up, you have a passion. You're very good at educating people and presenting on this topic. Like, I can tell the time that you spend with people who have abused their partners and are in this program, doing intake, on the phone with them, in person with them. Like, I I know I haven't been to one of your classes, and I know you've said like anytime, pop it. Like, I know you make a difference because you already have with our team. And like, I'm trying to express to you like how much you've made a difference, because like we're extremely grateful for you. And like our violence prevention work has been like forever changed because of what you have done.
Thank you. That's just so humbling to hear, right? That it's, oh, I've talked to this one person, and this one person or these two people have had their change of mind.
I think the reason it seems like I think such a huge deal for Melissa and I is because all of our training, all of our education in this work has always been isolating, excluding, shaming, punishing the person who has used abusive behaviors. We have never, ever been told to even consider what the partner who has caused some harm or hurt their partner, their other partner. We've never been told to consider them. And then when you brought that up and like we started thinking about it, it's like, well, all we're doing then is just like waiting for all of these people who have used abusive behaviors to just suddenly change? Or we're going to put them all away in a box in a prison somewhere together, nonetheless. So now they all hurt each other, right? And like that, it doesn't change anything. It just moves the harm around.
Right. And I will say, like in our big training, when we first come into the agency or any domestic violence or sexual violence agency, you have to like receive tons of hours of training. I mean, like I think ours is like 67 hours or something like that. It's wild. And then you only get about just like a little bit of that is about people who choose harm, is how it was said to us. And then in one of our curriculums, like for school, it's called Safe Dates. And I know like there's a section on there like, well, why do people abuse other people, basically? And like, why? Okay, so like we can talk about that all day. We can also talk about like why do people stay with people who abuse them. But like it always feels like we end up saying, yes, like this happens. Yes, we take these things into consideration, but it's not an excuse. And again, like we take them back to like focusing on the survivor, which absolutely, I don't think that should ever be discounted. But I also think there is just so much to be said about building up these skills for healthy relationships, having these times in our lives where we say, you know, I did this thing and it's not okay.
I'm not proud of it.
Okay. Yeah. And I just think there's just so much validity to the programming that you offer and what, like, I'm happy to hear that there's 93 programs. Do you think it's enough?
No. We get referrals from counties that don't have those programs surrounding ours.
Yeah. And so I hope more programs pop up around here. And of course, like I'm curious as to like what the 4 states are that don't have system outlined, like, and why?
Yeah.
Why is it?
You know, when you were talking and I just started thinking, when we label somebody an abuser, which is a big thing that Mara and I have been speaking about, is the language around what do we call the folks that have used abuse in a relationship? There's a thing called like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is, you know, the psychology behind it. When you label someone something, they're more likely to fulfill that role. So I think the language around it is really important, and Mara's been definitely helping me work through that. I'm not perfect at it. It's just another one of my things to work on.
Yeah.
But if you were gonna, what term would you use? What language would you prefer people use?
Yeah, I think person first language is important in all of the work we do. When we're talking about people who have disabilities or people who have experienced trauma, we're saying you are a person and this has happened to you. With PAIP with working with perpetrators of domestic violence, it's a little bit different because we don't want to negate that you chose to do this action. So for that reason, I choose to use the term people who use abuse, people who have chosen to use abuse behaviors, something like that. Because at your core, you are still a person. And shame and guilt have never, for me, been big factors in facilitating genuine change.
They don't know.
Yeah. So for that reason, we talk and we say, you are a worthy person. You are a valid person, but you have made poor choices, and those choices have become a pattern, and those choices harm the people around you that you're supposed to love and care about. So we do use that person first language, but we also acknowledge that in the difference of someone who has experienced trauma, generally we're not out there saying, woohoo, I'm so excited for trauma today, right? It's something that happens to you, whereas using abuse is something you have chosen to do. So I think that's a big distinction.
That is a big distinction, because part of that experience of trauma is feeling like you don't have control of the situation.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And control is a part of why people have used abusive behaviors.
Yeah, it's that central part, the desire to exert control over someone else, coupled with the belief that you deserve that control. Very often we see beliefs of feelings of unworthiness, a lack of self, a fear of their partner leaving them, a fear of being alone. And those are things that plague, I would say, almost everyone. I, of course, will be uncomfortable or have a fear of my partner leaving me, and my relationship is healthy and we work hard together, but I still have that fear.
Yeah.
I just have the tools to say, hey, I love you. I care about you. Right now I'm feeling a little bit insecure. Can you give me the words I need to reassure me? Whereas the people who are in PAIP maybe don't have those words or don't have the comfort, especially when we're working with men. Men have been, not all men, many times society socializes men to believe that the only allowable expression of emotion is anger. And we call that the male emotional funnel. So when they're young, it's, oh, you're crying like a little girl or things like that. And it becomes a derogatory thing to have emotions. And then as you move into adulthood, perhaps your other male friends are teasing you about how emotional you are. And they make having emotions be a shame. So why would you ever choose to express that if it means that you could ostracize yourself from society and not fit into the box? And so we're not going to say, oh, go out and express all these emotions to your friends, but we are going to encourage that they express it to their intimate partners. And if they need some help working on that, we want to give them those tools. But ultimately, starting at the very baseline of our relationships and being able to express our emotions openly and without fear of retaliation is a super important step.
Yeah, I mean, I know as an individual, my least healthy behaviors are always based in fear and insecurity. If I snap at my partner and say something snarky or nasty, it's usually because that was triggered because of my insecurity and my fear, which is, of course, things that I'm working on. I'm not just going to let that continue. But I can absolutely see how that could escalate to more than just, a snarky comment that you come back and apologize for later.
Right. And I know, like, similarly, my reaction to feelings like fear and hurt are like me trying to grasp for control in one way or another. Yeah. And so, like, totally normal. And that's what I hope caregivers hear today, like, that if you notice unhealthy behaviors in yourself, like, you are not a bad person. And that's what I love what you're talking about, person first language, because it's like, no, like, you just chose to act that way, and you might not even be aware that it was a choice you made because it's how you've been operating. I love how you talked about how the person who has chosen abuse, like, their experience of the cycle of abuse, because I have never thought of it that way before. I've always thought about the survivor's point of view.
Absolutely.
With that cycle, how, like, but, like, for the person who's chosen abuse, like, how they're just like, fine, explosion, fine.
Yeah.
That is blowing my mind right now.
Yeah, and that's where we see that honeymoon cycle come in, because people who use abuse can experience trauma from using that abuse. If you see yourself strangling your partner, that is traumatic.
Interesting.
And that makes you feel guilt and shame, which brings us into that honeymoon cycle of love bombing, apologizing. It's never going to happen again. Because at our core, we generally know that hurting other people is wrong. But again, if we don't have the tools to successfully communicate our needs and desires, we're going to fall back on what we were taught as children. And then that's where it comes into that generational cycle again. Our parents taught us this. And that doesn't mean it's impossible to change, but it's difficult to break a behavior that you have used for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there are so many things that we're all always working on. And like for me, just not saying guys as a reference to multiple people is just, I can't get it out. I've been working 2-3 years to get this out of my language. It's better. And that's just using a word. I can't imagine when it's, steeped in your insecurity, your feelings about yourself, how you were raised. That makes it so much more complicated. And I think it's going to mean there's more work that you're going to have to put in to change that.
Yeah. And a part of that work is beginning to experience vulnerability. And that to me is the scariest thing of all. I don't like to be vulnerable.
Me neither.
I do not like to express my weaknesses for that fear of someone may use them against me.
Yes.
And so to ask a participant to do that would be unfair if we as facilitators are not doing it. So it's important to us to lead by example. I would say many, many, many people have used an abuse behavior. That doesn't mean that they are abusive. But for example, I have yelled at my partner. That's an example of emotional abuse. It's not a pattern in my relationship. It's not something that I'm proud of. It's something that I try really hard not to use, but it happens sometimes. And so that's a really big equalizer, I think, is to think about how many people have used these behaviors. And are you comfortable saying that out loud? Are you comfortable taking ownership of something you are not proud of?
Melissa and I have reckoned with that in particular because of when we teach healthy relationship behaviors, we have had personal conversations where we're like, we told that, where we stand up in a room and tell kids not to do this thing. And then 2 weeks ago, I lost my cool and yelled at my partner or gave them the silent treatment, And I think you and I now have incorporated those stories into our healthy relationship education so people don't see it, label themselves monster, abuser, bad person, and then carry that with them, which would only fuel the likelihood that they might use an unhealthy coping mechanism or behavior on another person.
Yeah, I think there's just so much power in knowing that, like, if you have exhibited unhealthy behaviors in the past, like, you can start to become aware of them, like that's the first step, and like really start to reconcile, like, hey, I did it and I'm going to choose something else, but I need to learn how to do it because I haven't learned that yet. Because if you're using it, like, I know for myself, like, I wasn't taught really good communication skills or like even how to handle conflict without the yelling and stuff. And I know that's where I tend to go when I'm super stressed, like my not best self. That's where I go because that's what I grew up with. But like, I can learn how to do things differently. It takes, like you said, so much work. And I can imagine the amount of work that the people in your programs are doing on themselves.
How commendable.
Yeah. And I wonder, so how effective do you feel that this program is in reducing intimate partner violence?
I think that it is absolutely effective. In our program, we have not had any recidivism during the course of the time that they've been in program. From research I found from like the National Institute of Justice, it's been shown as effective in reducing recidivism and victimization. I've also seen the statistics that someone who successfully completes a PAIP program is over 50% more likely not to reoffend.
That's significant.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is significant.
And I think, like, because like you said, they're learning the skills of how to do this in a healthy way, like be in these relationships. And I think that makes such a difference to be given the time of day by somebody who sees them as worthy, and for them to take that in and feel that self-worth for themselves, and then to know, like, I'm being taught how to do this now, and to practice it and to really live it. Like, that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't force change. For me, that's the greatest challenge of PAIP.
Yeah,
I wish I could just make you believe what I'm saying and adapt it in your life, but change is a process that comes from within. I cannot make you change. You have to be in that mindset of deciding, I do not want to live like this. I do not want my children to live like this. A lot of times when we come to the parenting unit, that's where I see a lot of light bulbs go off. Do you want your children to experience this in their adult relationships? And every time the answer has been no.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful question to ask ourselves, and for everyone who's listening to ask themselves, like, am I modeling the kind of relationship that I hope my kids have?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I always think about it.
Yeah.
Do I always behave my best? No, because I'm human.
Yeah. And we have stressors, and,
But yeah,
it comes up, but it's how we handle ourselves, even like in the moment, but also after the moment. How are we resolving conflict? How are we?
Yeah. We've talked about taking accountability.
Apologize. Yes.
Repairing.
Yes.
Committing to continue to work to do better.
Yes.
Yeah. This is all just really, it's just a lot to take in. And especially for myself, I think, and Melissa, because there's a bit of cognitive dissonance still happening because we're still in that process of retraining ourselves.
Yeah.
In how we speak and how we think. Again, we were really steeped in this culture of abusers are monsters.
Well, and even using the term abusers rather than using person-first language,
yeah.
like that's what keeps going on in my mind. I'm like, I'm so tempted to say abusers or perpetrators because that is how we've talked about it in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I use the term perpetrator just as you have perpetrated a crime. That does not mean that you are going to continue to do so, but it does name the action in fewer words, I think.
Yeah. I think though, like, the work you do, I feel like it really helps see the person.
Yeah.
And I want to do better at even when I'm presenting more like survivor based kind of stuff. I want to make sure that, like, I'm recognizing that the person who committed the abuse, right, like, is still a person.
Yeah, I've been trying to change as I present and speak, trying to be aware of not using the term abuser more lately, of course, now, right? Let's see, what else do we want to mention? Or is there anything specific that we haven't touched on that you wanted to share with listeners?
I think that when we are confronted with something we are not proud of, it often results in pushback. If someone were to say to me, Mara, you are not doing your job well, the immediate feeling that I have is that feeling of resistance, of no, denial, minimization, maybe even blame. Like, oh, well, you were the one who was supposed to teach me this, so you didn't teach me,
Defensive.
so it's not my fault. Yeah. Those are all feelings that come up, and those feelings are natural. And it's important that we don't invalidate our feelings because our emotions are inherently valid all of the time. How we express those emotions is not always valid. And I think that that's a really big thing to think about when we're doing this work, when I'm doing PAIP, or when you're in classrooms with kids who sometimes are emotionally dysregulated, or teachers or adults who are, that perhaps this emotionally deregulated person who's coming at you with hostility simply doesn't have the tools to express what they are feeling.
Yeah.
And we see that with our participants a lot. And I even see it in myself. And I've done the work and I've tried really hard to express healthily my emotions. I've gone to therapy, and even then I still struggle. I still make mistakes. And so to have that grace with our participants to understand, like, this is a process, you're going to make mistakes, But as facilitators, we're going to continue to push back. We're going to continue to challenge you to do better. And we're going to call you out when you use that minimization behavior. And I think that that's a really big consideration in this work that perhaps we hadn't touched on thus far.
Interesting. Are there follow-up once they've completed the program?
Yeah, absolutely. They have the option to come back to any group anytime free of charge. They are going to complete a survey asking about different factors of the group. What did they learn? What could they improve? And even during group, we're saying, no, if you don't agree with us, then say you don't agree with us. And we're going to break that down. We're going to get to the core of that. And so I would hope that that level of honesty and that feeling of knowing it's okay to not agree comes out again in the surveys that they complete after successful discharge.
I really appreciate that they have the opportunity to come back and participate free of charge, because I know, was it 28 weeks you said? 26 weeks. Like, it is a decent amount of time, but, you know, stressors come up, things happen. Sometimes we fall back into behavior patterns we had relied on in the past. And I think it's really amazing that you are like, hey, if it happened, we're still here. Come on back. We can work through this together.
Yeah, absolutely. They have our emails as facilitators. They have phone numbers. It's not like we're not reachable or not contactable. And sometimes they'll even text to say, hey, I did this thing. Someone recently got a job, excuse me, and let me know that they got that job, and we're excited to celebrate those milestones.
Oh, heck yeah. No, well, I was going to say, like, what are some of the success things that, you know, what do you feel proud of? What successes do you see? And that's clearly one of them, is that not only are they being successful in their lives, they're excited to share it with you as a facilitator. So you've clearly established this relationship where they feel safe and they know they can count on you.
Yeah. One other successes are those little things. I've really had to redefine my vision of success in this position from how I've seen it in others, because this time I'm looking at every time you say, I did this. Every time you said, I'm not proud of this, but it happened over the weekend. And every time you say, I don't know what you're asking me for, when you say accountability, every time we see that questioning and improvement, that to me looks like success. It's a step forward, which is very different than these exactly measurable outcomes and goals that I've had in other positions that I've held.
Yeah. As a whole, anything that is related to emotions, thoughts, feelings, quantifying that is very difficult. In research, we even have a whole different name for that kind of research. It's qualitative research, because you cannot really quantify feelings. It's just, you can't put a number on it, right? So it can be more difficult to sometimes in, you know, reporting to funders or things like that. It is harder to say, I see progress, because they said, you know, I don't know what you mean by accountable. Or they said, I see what I did there, and I recognize it wasn't great. Those aren't necessarily numbers you can report. So I think that's probably very difficult, but it's awesome that you have reframed your personal idea of what success might look like to fit that. If you hadn't, I imagine it would be hard to continue to do this job.
Yeah. So what would you like to say to listeners who may be committing harm to others in their household?
Many people have used abuse behaviors, which we had already talked about. For example, that I've yelled. That's one that I had already brought up. When it becomes a concern is when it becomes a pattern, or when your partner or other people in your life are giving you this feedback that you are not doing something right. You should never force your partner to stay with you, and the partner should never feel afraid to be around you. You are the person who should keep them safe and make them feel loved. If you felt uncomfortable listening to this podcast episode, then perhaps it's time to talk to someone and to reevaluate if your actions have harmed your partner's physical, emotional, or mental well-being. Also, if you've felt the need to justify how you treat your partner, I do this because they do this, again, maybe it is time to talk to someone. Maybe it's time to reevaluate. That first step always starts with you, and our job is to be here when you're ready to take that first step.
Yeah.
That's very similar to survivors as well, right? The first step is you have to reach out. And it's up to you.
And
when
nobody
you're
else
ready
can
to
do it
that.
for
Yep.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a difference is sometimes the court is going to say, you
Yes.
got to do this. You're going to take this first step. But at that point, you've been involved with the legal system because something you have done now has such a serious consequence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that.
Did you want to share anything about how people locally could access this program?
Yeah, absolutely. So Safe Journeys crisis line, is that something you share in the podcast?
Yes.
Okay. So you can reach out to our crisis line and they can give me a referral, and that would be the absolute easiest, fastest way. Once I get your name, I can reach out to you. I'll call you, and then I'll let you know that if you're more comfortable texting, you can text. Right. So even that little difference.
Oh, yeah. I do that a lot with folks as well. So our phone number, so if you're in and around Livingston and LaSalle County, you can call our crisis hotline that Mara was just mentioning at 815-673-1555. That's 24/7. We're here on Christmas. We're here on a snowstorm. Well, the phone number might be rerouted on a snowstorm, but someone's going to answer. Someone's going to answer that phone. You're not going to call and it's just going to ring and ring. We do have it at the end of the podcast, but I just wanted to throw it in there right now. Yeah. And if they are not around our service area, and they can't access Safe Journeys services, what would you recommend these folks do?
So IDHS, that's the Illinois Department of Human Services, has an office locator. It's just a website. Google IDHS office locator. And then under the top drop down, select Partner Abuse Intervention Program services, and that is going to connect you with local services in your area. So lots of times we even have virtual options. If you're someone who can't drive to that position, or perhaps someone who's primarily Spanish speaking or speaking a different language, that's going to connect you to those services.
That's great. And I imagine other states, for anybody who's listening in another state, will have a similar on their state. Humanity or human services is going to have something very similar.
Yeah, and you can just Google Batterers Intervention Program. So Michigan, which is my home state, it's Batterers Intervention Programs in Michigan. You can Google it. It's going to pop up. It's also going to pop up the number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So perhaps you're a partner who's questioning, should my partner be in this group?
Right.
It's going to automatically connect you to a support resource for you, and B, give you options of groups in your area.
That's awesome.
We always do a media we love in our podcast episodes. And so I'm wondering if there's something you can tell us about this Making Amends podcast that you started to tell Heather and I about.
Yeah, I think that this is fantastic because in this episode, our host goes into prisons and talks to people who are incarcerated, who have done things like murder, right? Those things that we often see as unforgivable. And they talk about perhaps these people have found a faith that's helping them to create that change. And the episode that I really wanted to point out was in season 1, episode 8, which is we are genuinely trying to repair harm, which talks about, are there systems within our prison systems that can help with rehabilitation for the people who are incarcerated? Again, we just can't create change if we don't give someone the tools and opportunity to learn about it.
Absolutely. Because again, like you were talking about with the expectations, like we have to have clear expectations and we have to know them in order to do this work. So, yeah. And then what about the Becoming Allies book by Chris, is it Huffine or Huffine?
Yeah. Yep. He came out with this book really recently, and he's a facilitator in Michigan. And this book is written specifically to the people who use abuse. Perhaps you're not ready for a PAIP program. Perhaps you're not ready to do this in a group setting. This book is something that you can read through that's going to talk about these tools, the things you may be feeling. So it's written directly for those people. And it's also a really great resource for facilitators of these groups because his insight is just fantastic. So.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing those resources with us.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mara. We are so happy that you were able to be here with us.
Yes.
You will definitely hear from me and Melissa regularly. How do I do this? Help. I made this mistake. But we appreciate you so much and everything you've done for us, for Safe Journeys, that you're doing for our community. It's a big deal. Affecting one individual in your program has a ripple effect in the community. So it's very, very powerful. Anything you'd like to say before we close today?
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mara. Anything,
yes,
Melissa?
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, just thank you so much for being here today.
All right, everyone, you gotta keep listening for those resources. And if you need anything, of course, you can look to our social media on Instagram and Facebook and contact us at any time.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Look out for new podcasts every other Monday on anywhere that you can find your podcasts. Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Anchor FM, you name it. We're there. If you have any questions, and we would love to hear from you, you can email us at saferjourneyspod@safejourneysillinois.org. You can also message us on social media. We have a Facebook and an Instagram that you can find us at. And let's talk about some resources for anyone who's experiencing abuse. If you happen to live in and around LaSalle or Livingston County in Illinois, please feel free to call Safe Journeys support line at 815-673-1555. 24/7, confidential, services are free. If you don't happen to be in our area, there are 2 national hotlines that you can call for support. For sexual violence, you can call RAIN with 2 N's. That's the National Sexual Violence Hotline. Their phone number is 800-656-HOPE. They also have a live chat on their website if you're interested. And for domestic violence or intimate partner abuse, you can call the hotline, which is simply thehotline.org. And this is our national domestic violence hotline. And you can give them a call at 800-799-SAFE or chat live on the website. Thanks for listening.